Okay, so we were talking about having expectancy effects as an experimenter. So one way that you can deal with that is just not knowing what the participants are doing or what condition they're put in. So if you think, for example, the one article that you read, where in the first part people had to get interrogated, and half the participants did commit the crime and the other half did not commit the crime. Well, if you're the police interrogator and you know who really did commit the crime and who didn't, you might be more harder and more commanding to the group that you know committed the crime. And therefore, their body language might be different, which would influence the second part of that study. So that is why the detective was interrogating all the participants and he did not know who actually committed a crime versus who was just brought in. Expectancy effects can be found in the real world. So this is a video that I will attach. If I don't find this video, I'll find a similar one. And basically, it's a horse that can count. So this horse knows how to count. So people would think, oh my God, he's a genius horse. And this actually occurred long ago.
I'm Mr. Ray.
So the idea is there was this mathematician who had this horse. And every time someone would ask him a question, the horse would stomp his, what is that? Not his claw, his hoof. He would stomp his hoof and give you the answer. So if you asked, what's 5 times 6, he would stomp his hoof 30 times. So everyone thought that this horse knew how to do math. But what was actually happening is the guy who owned the horse would involuntarily tilt his head slightly when it was approaching the correct answer. So he didn't even know he was doing it. It wasn't, a scam. It was incidental. It was an unconscious response. But the horse was extremely sensitive to this visual cue. So he could detect the small movements in the head. Now I want you to think, if you are trying to question this, how would you test the horse in a way to make sure that it is really the horse that can answer this question and not the owner tilting his head? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. So hopefully you were thinking of a way to actually, you would just ask the horse questions without either the owner's presence, or you would block the owner from seeing the horse, or more importantly, the horse from seeing the owner. And then that way, when the horse doesn't have the owner as a cue, he would not be able to do math anymore. Excuse me. Another example of this was actually talked about in class. Facilitated communication was another example of this, and it grew very popular, where someone who had severe communication problems or educational problems, or they were quadriplegic, they would have these helpers who would guide their hands, and then the argument was that with the guidance, the person could actually communicate. Well, what ended up happening is they found out that it wasn't the person communicating, but it was the guider that was actually communicating their own thoughts and beliefs and passing it off as the person with the illness. So the way that got debunked is, in one study, they would show the person with the disability an image, and then they showed the guided facilitator a different image, unbeknownst to them. And the person would then write out, ask the disabled person, what was the image we showed you? And of course, the disabled person would quote unquote write out the image, but it was the image that the facilitator saw, because they were actually not doing it at all. It was the facilitator doing it, writing this information out, pretending as if it was the person with the disability. So there's ways to control for experimenter expectations. You need well-trained experimenters who run all the conditions simultaneously, and they automate the protocol. And the reason you do this is so you make it so that the experimenter cannot tell what condition the participant is. So from their perspective, they should be doing the exact same talk, the exact same behavior every single time they have a participant, regardless of what condition that the participant is in. Furthermore, they should be unaware of the hypothesis. So a single blind study is when the participant is unaware of the hypothesis. A double blind study is when both the participant and the experimenter are unaware of the hypothesis. What is a manipulation check? So some of you are actually doing this in your study already. Basically, the idea of the manipulation check is to make sure that your independent variable had the intended effect. Did you actually manipulate the participants so that one group actually had one experience that was different from the other group? This is especially useful in pilot studies. A pilot study is when you kind of do a preliminary study to see that your procedure is actually working. So if you're trying to manipulate exhaustion and you put one group, you give them math tasks, and the other group, you give them cartoons, you can do that as a pilot study to make sure are your groups actually different in response to exhaustion. And the reason you want to do that in a pilot study is you can only run 10 people. And if you're already seeing in a manipulation check that the group that was given math is not reporting being more tired than the group that were given cartoons, well, then your manipulation is not working. And it saves you the expense of running the actual experiment, because this experiment as a whole can take months to run. So if you're running this experiment for months and then you realize your manipulation isn't even working, that is a waste of time, it's a waste of participants, and you'll have to start over. When you have a manipulation check, you literally just ask them the question of what you're manipulating. It's usually the easy way to do it, and you do it towards the end. So I once had a study and I was trying to manipulate motivation. So for one group of participants, we offered a raffle for top performers on a task so that they could win $50. And then in the other group, we didn't offer any raffle or any money. Now, ethically, they were all put in the raffle at the end. But the idea was that the people who knew about the $50 raffle would be more motivated to perform well on the task. My manipulation check at the end was literally, how motivated were you to perform on the task? So, and the idea was that I would see a significant difference. People in the raffle would score higher on the scale than people who were not given this $50 raffle. So that's the end of this lecture. We will start lecture, I believe it's 10. I'll post that this week. Have a nice Sunday or whatever day you're watching this.